we're going to talk about some recent advances in building energy codes and how the energy efficiency levels have improved over time, and in fact since 1975. And we'll talk about current policies that set the framework for energy codes and their role in other policies and energy strategies. We'll talk about where these codes come from a bit, and then again talk about these historical improvements. And to emphasize Brian's earlier point, energy code minimums represent the least efficient building you can legally build. So we're talking about the minimum here. So currently for national policies, we have what's called ECPA, the Energy Conservation and Reduction Act, and this is part of legislation that has its roots back in the late 1970s that were a response to the oil embargo in the mid-1970s, if you remember those events. This was an explicit movement to try and improve our energy security and our energy independence by making our building stock more energy efficient. There are other parts of that law that actually put the code development in the private sector with the International Code Council and with ASHRAE, the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers. And the federal government's role in here is to evaluate these privately developed standards and to see if one version of a standard saves energy over the previous version. And if it does, they bless it, and then the states have 2 years to consider its adoption and inform the DOE secretary about their intentions, whether to adopt it or not. So this is something that West Virginia is going to have to do eventually, because DOE issued a determination for ASHRAE Standard 90 recently, and there's one expected this quarter for the International Energy Conservation Code. So that's kind of how they fit in. Now with model code development, there's some contrast you can draw between the model residential energy code that's referenced in federal statutes, which is the International Energy Conservation Code. And then there's the commercial requirements that are part of ASHRAE Standard 90.1. And both of these codes have a 3-year development cycle, but they're a little bit different in how they operate. The ICC, the International Code Council, administers a process, and it's pretty much a free-for-all among parties that put proposals in, comment on it, and it's actually put to a vote for members, governmental members of the International Code Council. So you might say, well, why do these things matter? In addition to providing the minimum specifications for code, for new construction, they are also referenced as the benchmark in other standards. For example, the energy efficient mortgage programs, manufactured housing standards by HUD, and other requirements like that. The federal building standards for the federal government's own buildings have their roots in these standards, and oftentimes they're referenced, and say in the case of the federal buildings, they have to achieve an energy performance level above and beyond that, if it's cost effective. So once we get these standards promulgated and published, they affect a lot of other things throughout our economy. I don't want to dwell on this, but there's in the case of the International Code Council and the International Energy Conservation Code, this cycle here, again, provides a lot of opportunity for public input. Any individual can submit a code proposal, and it will be heard. And it's heard in a couple of parts where a committee screens them. They're published as proceedings. People make public comments on those. All those public comments are heard. And then in a room with hundreds of people, sometimes 1,000 people, individual code officials from across the nation cast their ballot, raise their hand, and vote for these things. And if depending on the vote, that provision may get published in the next code. So, in terms of the kinds of performance we've seen, this chart really didn't come out too well. But it shows from 1975 right up through 2012, a history of the kind of improvements that were made, in this case to the residential code, the International Energy Conservation Code. And there were a series of improvements that were made over time. You can see that there's been modest single-digit improvements of 2%, 1%, and so forth, until we get up to around 2009, when there was a concerted effort, as energy efficiency has a more prominent role in energy policy now. A lot of policymakers decided, well, we need to ramp up these codes. So in the last two code cycles, with the 2009, for example, we provided a 15% gain over the previous version. And the 2012 IECC provides a 15% gain beyond that. So in the last two code cycles, we've had a 30% improvement, and that outweighs all the improvements we've gained since 1975. So this is becoming a lot more serious. On the commercial side, the progress has been a little more steady, but there were some periods in the 1980s and 1990s where there was very little progress at all. But again, ASHRAE's made up for that by pushing the 2007 standard and again the 2010 standard. And in the aggregate, that's about almost a 30% improvement for that. So I think people are taking this more seriously. It's deemed to be cost effective, as Brian pointed out earlier. So what we might say in conclusion is that these things have been part of our national energy policy since the mid-1970s, and it's there for a reason. The last code cycles have produced phenomenal improvements in energy efficiency that every state can take advantage of. And I think as energy becomes more important as an issue for all of us, energy codes provide a good means of assuring a minimum level of efficiency that's cost-effective and reasonable for both residential and commercial construction. Thank you very much.